When a man begins to chase someone who is pulling away, his instinct is often to do more, call more, explain more, show more affection, send long emotional messages, try to fix things. But what he often doesn't realize is that every move he makes in desperation is silently broadcasting weakness, not just emotional vulnerability, which can be admirable in the right context, but psychological dependence, which is a very different thing. People are drawn to those who have their own gravity, those who stand firm in who they are. And that kind of inner strength isn't loud. It doesn't beg. It doesn't plead. It simply is. But when you're needy, you reverse the natural polarity of attraction. You begin pulling instead of radiating. You become the taker rather than the giver. That creates imbalance, discomfort, and eventually distance. The moment your happiness depends on someone else's presence, you've handed over your power. And when that power transfer happens, attraction dies, often without a word. Neediness isn't about love, it's about fear. The fear of being alone, the fear of not being good enough, the fear that without this person, your life loses meaning, and fear makes you act irrationally. It makes you contort your values, compromise your dignity, and try to become whatever you think will win them back. But in doing so, you lose the very thing that made you valuable in the first place, your identity. Strength, on the other hand, is not indifference. It's not coldness or arrogance. True strength is quiet confidence. It's rooted in the knowledge that you will be okay with or without this person, because your foundation is built on something deeper than external validation. It's the ability to sit with your pain, process it, and not let it dictate your behavior. It's understanding that your worth doesn't fluctuate based on who stays or who leaves. When you stop trying, when you truly stop, not to manipulate, not to provoke a reaction, but because you've realized that your energy is better invested in yourself, something shifts. She feels it, people sense it. That frantic energy that once pushed them away is gone. In its place is calm, stillness, presence, the kind of energy that makes people wonder, what changed? You're no longer performing. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You're choosing yourself. And paradoxically, that's when others start to take notice again, because you're no longer seeking approval. You're giving it to yourself. You're not asking someone else to validate your existence. You're validating your own by doing the work, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Think about this. What's more attractive? A man who cannot function without someone, or a man who is so immersed in building himself that he becomes a force of nature? One repels, the other draws people in. Because deep down, people are drawn to growth, to challenge, to those who inspire a higher standard of living, not because of what they say, but because of how they are. Neediness comes from a scarcity mindset, the belief that if you don't keep this one person, you'll never find love again. But that's a lie you tell yourself to avoid the hard work of becoming better. When you stop chasing, you create space. Space for self-reflection, space for maturity, space to reconnect with your purpose, your mission, your vision for life. And that space is essential, because in that space, you build resilience. You remember who you were before the relationship and who you're capable of becoming after it. And here's the truth that most don't want to hear. If someone only wants you when you're desperate, they don't truly value you. But if someone comes back when you've stopped trying, it may be because they recognize something real in you, something grounded, something whole. But that recognition must never be your goal. It's merely a side effect of growth. If you change for the sake of getting them back, you haven't truly changed. You're still performing. And performance is exhausting. Growth is liberating. You don't become attractive by trying harder to be liked. You become attractive by becoming more yourself, authentically, powerfully, unapologetically. That's not something you can fake. It's something you earn, one disciplined choice at a time. So stop chasing, not because it might bring her back, but because it brings you back. There's something you need to understand if you want to take control of your relationships, your identity, and your future. Your attention is one of the most valuable things you possess. It's your energy, your focus, it's your time, your presence, your awareness. Where you direct it determines what grows in your life and what dies from neglect. But here's the problem. Most men don't treat their attention like it has any value at all. They give it away freely, constantly, without any sense of discipline or self-respect, especially when it comes to someone they desire. And that unconscious act of overinvestment slowly dismantles their value in the eyes of others and in their own perception of self. When you chase someone with all your attention, pouring your mental energy into what she's doing, what she's thinking, why she hasn't called, or who she might be with, you stop living your life and start orbiting hers. You've placed her at the center of your universe. You may not say it out loud, but your behavior declares that her validation is more important than your mission. And whether she realizes it consciously or not, that is deeply unattractive. Why? Because you've made it clear that your attention isn't rare. It's not something to earn. It's something you give away just because you feel emotional about someone. And people don't value what's easy to get. Think about it in economic terms. If you could walk into a store and take whatever you want for free, you wouldn't value anything in that store. But if something is scarce, protected, and only offered under certain conditions, it becomes desirable. Your attention works the same way. When you give it indiscriminately, it becomes background noise. When you protect it, when you direct it with intention, it becomes powerful. And people feel that. When you stop trying so hard to get her to notice you, when you redirect your attention back toward your own life, something profound happens. You start to reclaim your personal power. Your eyes lift off the screen where you're watching her stories, and they rise to meet your own future. You stop scrolling through her feed and start working on your own body, your own skills, your own career, your own purpose. And that shift in energy is not only felt by you, it radiates outwards. When someone who used to obsess over you suddenly withdraws that energy and starts building, starts creating, starts moving forward, the absence is felt, not as a punishment, but as a recalibration of value. You're no longer saying, please choose me. You're saying, I've chosen myself. And that's magnetic. That's when people start to wonder where you went, what you're doing, and why you're no longer trying so hard. That curiosity replaces the previous comfort they felt in knowing you were always available. But none of this works if you're doing it as a tactic. If you're only pulling back your attention so she comes chasing, it's still about her. It's still weakness dressed up as strategy. What matters is that you genuinely understand that your attention needs to be invested where it matters most. On your path, your growth, your higher potential. That's not selfish, that's responsibility. Because if you don't control your attention, someone else will. They'll pull you into their drama, their emotions, their validation loops, and you'll lose yourself trying to stay relevant in someone else's story. Every time you answer a text immediately because you're afraid she might think you're not interested, you're training yourself to be reactive. Every time you pause your goals to respond to her cold behavior or silence, you're prioritizing uncertainty over structure. But when you stay rooted in your principles, in your discipline, in your routines, you tell the world and yourself that your life doesn't stop for anyone, that your time and energy are earned, not given away out of habit or insecurity. You are not a beggar for affection. You are not a background character in her story. You are the author of your own. But to live that way You must believe your attention is worth something, and then act like it. That means being intentional about who gets it. That means building a life so full of purpose that you don't have time to obsess over someone else's opinion. That means showing the world, not through arrogance, but through quiet strength, that your focus is a gift, and only those who respect it get to share in it. And when you live like that, something strange and powerful begins to happen. The very people who once ignored you now wonder why you've gone quiet, why your eyes are no longer fixed on them, why your time is no longer available on demand. And in that absence, they remember something they once took for granted, your presence. But by then, you'll be too focused on becoming something greater to need their attention, because you'll know the truth. You never needed it in the first place. What you needed was your own. One of the most misunderstood aspects of human relationships is the role of boundaries. People talk about love, chemistry, and compatibility, but very few talk about the fact that relationships, especially romantic ones, are also defined by invisible lines. And those lines, whether clearly set or weakly drawn, determine how others treat you. If you don't have boundaries, people will test you. And if you don't enforce those boundaries, they'll keep testing until you break. Now let's talk about her, why she might come back after you've stopped trying. It's not always about love. Sometimes it's about power. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes it's just curiosity. She wants to see if the door she used to walk through so freely is still wide open. She wants to know if she still has access to you. And more often than not, when someone comes back after pushing you away, they're not checking to reunite. They're checking to see if they still can. This is where boundaries matter more than ever. If you were the kind of man who bent over backwards to keep her happy, always available, always apologizing, always compromising your values just to keep the peace, then what you were showing her was not love. It was fear. Fear of loss, fear of conflict, fear of being alone. And people instinctively test fear not out of cruelty, but because we all subconsciously look for strength in those around us. We push to see if there's resistance. We want to know where the limits are, because limits are what create structure, and structure is what creates respect. When you have no boundaries, you are not seen as kind. You are seen as weak. You become the person who can be used, manipulated, taken for granted. And it doesn't always happen out of malice. Sometimes people are just figuring out what they can get away with. It's human nature. If you show someone that you'll forgive anything, tolerate everything, and never walk away, what reason do they have to treat you with care? What reason do they have to honor your time, your energy, your emotions? The moment you start enforcing boundaries, not through anger or revenge, but through quiet, firm action, you change the dynamic. You stop being predictable. You stop being an emotional safety net. You stop being the person they can mistreat without consequence. And it's in that shift that respect is either born or permanently lost. If she comes back and finds the same man she left, the man who still waits, still hopes, still jumps at the sound of her voice, then she knows nothing's changed. You're still emotionally available on her terms. But if she comes back and finds a man who is centered, self-respected, focused on his purpose, and not willing to entertain chaos, then she realizes she's no longer in control of the story. And that realization often triggers either genuine admiration or total disinterest. Because the moment you enforce boundaries, you filter out those who were only there to use your openness. Having boundaries doesn't mean being cold. It means knowing what you will and won't accept. It means walking away when someone disrespects you, not to punish them, but to protect your peace. It means recognizing that not everyone deserves access to your heart, your time, or your energy. That access is earned, not assumed. And the way people respond to your boundaries tells you everything about their intentions. If she only comes back when you're no longer giving her everything, what does that say? It means she was more drawn to your availability than your soul. It means the dynamic worked better for her when you had no backbone. But when you grow a spine, when you create emotional distance, not out of bitterness but out of clarity, you shift the power back where it belongs, with you. You're no longer waiting to be chosen. You're deciding whether someone qualifies to be in your life. Understand this. Boundaries are not about keeping people out. They're about keeping your self-respect intact. And anyone who makes you feel guilty for setting them was never planning to respect you in the first place. The right people won't be threatened by your standards. They'll rise to meet them. Or they'll leave, and either outcome is a win, because clarity is always better than confusion. So the next time someone circles back into your life, don't ask, do they still care? Ask, have they earned the right to come back? If they haven't, your answer isn't cruel. It's mature. Because the only relationships worth having are the ones built on mutual respect, not emotional dependency. Boundaries make that possible. Without them, you'll forever be stuck in cycles where you give everything and get nothing in return. But with them, you stop chasing people and start attracting what you truly deserve. There comes a point in every man's life when he has to decide whether he's going to continue outsourcing his sense of worth to someone else or finally learn to generate it from within. Emotional self-reliance isn't about becoming cold or detached. It's not about pretending you don't care or hiding behind a mask of stoicism. It's about standing on your own emotional 2 feet. It's about knowing that while relationships are meaningful, they are not the foundation of your identity. Emotional self-reliance is power because it makes you whole on your own terms. Far too many men fall into the trap of tying their emotional stability to the behavior of someone else. If she's warm, they're confident. If she's distant, they collapse. If she responds to their messages, they feel seen. If she ignores them, they spiral into self-doubt. This is not love, it's dependency. And dependency masquerading as love is dangerous because it causes you to betray yourself just to maintain the illusion of connection. You become reactive, anxious, and insecure, constantly adjusting who you are just to fit into her shifting moods. But when you begin to build emotional independence, the entire dynamic changes. You stop looking outward for validation and start creating it from within. You stop asking, does she still care about me? And start asking, am I living in alignment with who I'm meant to be? That shift in focus transforms you from someone who is emotionally fragile to someone who is emotionally grounded. And that kind of energy is rare and undeniably attractive. Being emotionally self-reliant doesn't mean you won't feel pain. You will. If someone you care about leaves, you'll still hurt. If a relationship ends, you'll still grieve. But you won't fall apart. You won't beg. You won't lose yourself. Because at your core, you know who you are. And that knowledge becomes your anchor, no matter how hard the emotional waves crash. When she sees that you're not chasing her anymore, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started caring more about yourself, it sends a very different message. It says, I'm no longer available for dynamics that drain me. It says, I've found peace in my solitude. It says, I know my value and I don't need anyone to remind me of it. That kind of posture comes not from pretending to be unaffected, but from doing the hard internal work, the kind that forces you to sit with your emotions rather than escape them. The kind that demands you learn how to comfort yourself, how to regulate your mind, how to stay focused when everything in you wants to unravel. There is immense power in knowing that your sense of peace is not tied to someone else's presence. That even if she never comes back, even if she forgets you, even if the chapter closes forever, you will still rise, not because you're heartless, but because you've learned how to hold space for your own pain without letting it define you. That's real maturity. That's strength. That's the difference between a boy looking for someone to complete him and a man who has completed himself and is now open to sharing, not surrendering, his life with someone. Emotional self-reliance doesn't mean you go it alone forever. It doesn't mean you isolate yourself or reject connection. It means you stop expecting someone else to fix what only you can heal. It means you become the source of your own emotional nourishment. And from that place, you no longer approach relationships with fear or insecurity. You're no longer performing, proving, or pleasing just to be accepted. You're simply showing up as you are, whole, centered, and rooted in self-respect. And when you live like that, something incredible happens. You become less attached to outcomes. You stop trying to control how people feel about you. You no longer panic when someone pulls away, because you've realized that anyone who needs you to abandon yourself in order to stay isn't someone you want to hold on to. You start choosing people who complement your journey, not those who consume it. The moment you become emotionally self-reliant, you become dangerous. In the best possible way. Dangerous to the patterns that once enslaved you. Dangerous to the narratives that said you're not enough on your own. And dangerous to anyone who only wanted you when you were emotionally dependent. Because now, you're not afraid to be alone. And the man who isn't afraid to be alone is the man who cannot be controlled. You don't need to chase anymore. You don't need to prove anything. You've done the work. And now, whether she stays or goes, you remain solid because your foundation is no longer made of someone else's approval. It's made of your own unshakable belief in who you are. There comes a moment in every broken connection when words lose their power. You've said what you needed to say. You've expressed your love, your frustration, your intentions. You've explained yourself, apologized, maybe even begged, and nothing changed. That's when you need to understand something deeply uncomfortable but ultimately freeing. Silence often speaks louder than anything else you can say. When words no longer have impact, silence becomes your strongest message. In a world where everyone rushes to explain, to argue, to persuade, choosing silence shows restraint, self-respect, and confidence. It's not about manipulation, it's about maturity. When someone has pushed you away, ignored your efforts, or taken your presence for granted, continuing to speak only dilutes your value. You become background noise, always there, always explaining, always available. But the moment you stop trying to be heard, the energy shifts. Your absence begins to say what your voice no longer could. Silence is not weakness, it's strength under control. It's the decision to no longer force a connection that is not being reciprocated. It's understanding that your worth is not proved by how loudly you plead, but by how calmly you walk away. You don't need to slam the door. You don't need to announce your exit. You just stop talking. You stop chasing. You stop giving them a front row seat to your vulnerability when they've done nothing to earn it. When you go silent, not as a tactic, but as a genuine withdrawal of energy, you create space. And in that space, people start to notice what they've been ignoring. They notice the lack of your check-ins, your comfort, your presence. And that's when reflection begins. People don't reflect when you're still talking. They react. They deflect. They defend. But when the noise stops, when there's nothing left to push against, they sit with themselves. And sometimes in that silence, they finally hear the echo of what you were trying to communicate all along. It's important to understand the difference between silence used as a weapon and silence used as self-respect. Weaponized silence is about punishment. It's rooted in ego and control. But self-respecting silence is about clarity. It's knowing you've done your part, and now the next move is not yours. It's choosing to protect your peace instead of constantly proving your worth to someone who refuses to see it. People often return when the silence gets louder than the words ever did. When they realize the certainty of your absence, when they feel the void your presence once filled. But the goal isn't to make them come back. That's the old mindset, the mindset of chasing, of performing, of seeking validation. The true goal is peace. To step away from chaos and emotional noise, to reclaim your center and rebuild your strength in silence. Some of the most powerful moments in your personal growth won't be seen or praised. They'll happen quietly. When you resist the urge to text, to call, to explain again, when you let the discomfort of silence do its work, because it is uncomfortable, especially if you've been the one always reaching out. You'll feel the pull to break it, to say just one more thing, but every time you resist that urge, you grow. You teach yourself that you don't need to fill the silence with noise. You can sit with it. You can let it speak for you. Silence also forces you to face your own emotional dependency. It reveals the part of you that believes your words will change someone's heart. But the truth is, if words haven't worked by now, more of them won't either. Silence becomes the proof that you are no longer available for one-sided effort, that you are no longer clinging to false hope, that your self-worth is not up for negotiation. Eventually, silence becomes peace. It no longer feels like punishment. It becomes a sanctuary where you heal, think clearly, and reconnect with yourself. And by the time someone reaches out again, if they ever do, you'll no longer be in the same emotional place. You'll have evolved, and you'll be able to respond not from desperation, but from discernment. You'll be able to ask, is this right for me? Does this serve my growth? Is this love or is this convenience? Because that's the final truth about silence. It not only speaks to others, it speaks to you. It reveals what's real, what's broken, and what you're willing to tolerate. It becomes the turning point between the version of you that needed their approval and the version of you that only seeks alignment. When you can choose silence over self-betrayal, you win. Not because you got them back, but because you got yourself back. And that's a power no one can take from you. One of the hardest but most powerful lessons you can learn in life, especially in relationships, is the art of real detachment. Not the kind of detachment that masks pain with indifference, not the fake kind where you pretend not to care but still secretly wait for their return. Real detachment is a state of inner freedom. It's the moment you stop needing someone to complete you and begin standing fully in your own presence. And paradoxically, it's in that state, when you no longer chase, no longer cling, and no longer depend, that true attraction is born. People can feel when you're attached. It's in your words, your energy, your decisions. It's in how quickly you respond, how carefully you try not to upset them, how desperately you try to keep the connection alive, even when it's hurting you. That kind of attachment repels. It doesn't draw people in, it suffocates them, because it tells them, consciously or not, my peace depends on you. My identity is tied to your approval. And no matter how much someone likes you, that energy becomes a weight. No one wants the responsibility of carrying your emotional stability. That's your job. Real detachment doesn't mean you stop loving, It means you stop needing. You can still care deeply for someone. You can want them in your life, but you no longer need them to act a certain way to feel okay about yourself. That's the difference between desperate attachment and grounded strength. When you're truly detached, you're able to see things clearly. You no longer twist red flags into misunderstandings. You don't make excuses for disrespect. You don't shrink yourself to keep someone comfortable. You stand tall in who you are, and you let the chips fall where they may. And that energy, calm, self-contained, sovereign, is what creates real attraction. Because now, instead of trying to pull someone toward you, you become the kind of person who pulls people in without trying. You no longer have to sell yourself. You no longer have to convince them of your worth. You simply are someone of value. And your detachment proves it. It says, I'd love for you to be part of my life, but I'll be whole either way. That's not arrogance. That's emotional maturity. You see, most people only detach when they're angry, when they've had enough, when they're burned out. But that's not true detachment. That's emotional exhaustion disguised as independence. Real detachment is peaceful. It's not reactive. It's intentional. It's waking up one day and realizing that you've outgrown the need for external validation, that your purpose, your passions, your growth, those things matter more than being liked, accepted, or chosen by someone else. And when she notices that your life is moving with or without her, it creates a moment of clarity. She starts to wonder why you're not chasing, not explaining, not seeking her attention like before. It's not because you stopped caring. It's because you started caring more about yourself. That's what changes the entire dynamic. And in many cases, it's what draws her back. Not because you played a game, but because you stopped playing any games at all. You just got serious about your peace. You got committed to your growth. You fell back in love with your mission. And that kind of shift is magnetic. But here's what's crucial to understand. Real detachment must come from truth. You can't fake it. If you're pretending to move on just to get a reaction, you're still attached. If you're checking your phone every 5 minutes hoping they'll reach out, you're not free yet. Freedom comes when you no longer obsess over their response, when you no longer take their silence as rejection, when you stop measuring your value based on who stays or who leaves. You attract better when you don't need better. When you ultimately accept what is and move on to what you want based on it. When you stop better when you don't need better. You stop chasing love when you realize you've become the kind of person who deserves it, and that you're willing to walk away if it doesn't come with respect. That's when everything changes, not just in your relationships, but in how you carry yourself. Your posture changes, your conversations change, your standards rise, and people feel that, even in your silence. Real detachment isn't a tactic, it's transformation. It's not coldness, it's clarity. It's choosing yourself so fully that you're no longer tempted to abandon your standards just to feel wanted. You become the one who chooses, not just the one waiting to be chosen. You become the calm in the storm, not the one desperately trying to stop the rain. And when you reach that point, you don't just attract others, you attract peace. You attract growth. You attract relationships that actually nourish your life, not drain it. Because once you become whole on your own, anyone who comes into your life becomes a bonus, not a necessity. And that's where real power and real love begins.